This is the Think Big for July 28th for the testing group. New format for these meetings, or matching the format for the meetings that we started in the last one. Today will be the Think Big part of our discussion, and we'll follow it up next week with the Think Small. So the topic today is user-defined MR widgets or reports. And this comes from a couple of different issues that are sitting in our backlog. And today we're just going to talk about some of the big ideas to solve the problems, discover any related underlying root problems, and discuss who would value it. Talk a little bit about user experience, workflows. That is going to be the gist of today. So I'm going to kick it off with, hopefully everyone had a chance to click through to the Think Big issue, and then from there into the other issues. Open it up to the floor, and I'll start taking notes on, well, what's the problem that we're trying to solve, kind of what's the undercurrent of all of these things.
The running theme across, I mean, also in what everything else I've read about merge request widgets is, I think the core problem is people aren't seeing information they want in their merge request widgets.
What kind of information?
Well, I don't know. So, and so there's some examples in these issues about, you know, somebody wants Lighthouse or so whatever, but I think it's a lot of the issues here seem to be let customers get their own information into merge request widgets and sort of have it be much more user defined, to sort of open it up and say, well, you can have whatever you want here. Which it seems like it goes back to addressing the issue of the information that they do want to see there isn't there.
Can we unpack a little bit the customer information? Is that data about their app, like profiling data, things that might show up in the custom reports today? Or is it other integrations? Like we have data from Sauce Labs that we want to integrate, or we run our own load tests with Artillery and we want that data back into the MR widget or back into GitLab somewhere.
That I couldn't tell you. I mean, so most of it seems like a lot of the prescriptive kind of issues are like, oh, I want to see, I think Lighthouse was the one I can remember. But also if maybe our information was good enough, they'd be like, oh, we don't need Lighthouse anymore. GitLab does all this amazing stuff for free. Like, you know, let's just use that instead. How to balance those, I couldn't say. But it's sort of yeah, the initiative seems to be, if we open it up, we might get more information about what people actually want to use. We let them customize it, we then see what they're using and see what's important in practice.
So I'm going to poke one more level on that. Is it just information, or is there something else they want to do with that information? Because we're talking about within a merge request.
Yeah.
What other things would they do with that data in the normal flow of an MR through the system?
I have no idea.
If people are asking for Lighthouse, I mean, you said that that's one specific one that you remember.
I think that's the most recent one I saw, yeah.
Yeah, there's one specific issue that was called out as an example. Like, for instance, I could pull my Lighthouse reports in and show that data on the MR
right.
widget.
So no, the reason I'm mentioning that is because, like, if they're asking for that, is because they probably already use Lighthouse inside the DevTools, Chrome DevTools. So they already probably have like a workflow that it's manual. I mean, they go there, they like go to Lighthouse, and then they, I don't know, generate the report there. So like they probably want the exact same thing, but within the CI, right? So I don't know where I'm trying to get to with this, but what I'm trying to say is that like there's probably something that they're already doing with that manual report that they generate in the browser, you know? That's what we need to figure out they're doing.
So the problem for that customer is they use GitLab for their CI. They're using merge requests. They have data that's being generated as part of their pipeline or even outside of their pipeline once it's deployed to a review app that they want within the context, or they need within the context of the MR to know if they can improve it and merge it. Does that sound like kind of the gist? And I think Lighthouse is a good example of that because it could be the web performance, it could be the accessibility, but it's a manual process that they're doing and they have to do some sort of checks on before they can approve or merge the MR.
Right. No, I think that makes sense. What I'm saying is, what exactly are they getting from Lighthouse? You know, because Lighthouse has like SEO and it has like accessibility. I mean, it does like a bunch of things, right? It's not only accessibility, right? It's doing more than that. So
yeah, I think we can dig in with the user who submitted that one and try to get at their specifics about Lighthouse because we have the accessibility testing now, web performance, we can make enhancements too. I think if we pull up from that though and say, hey, there's other types of data that a customer is going to want, or a user rather, is going to want to expose into their MR page. That's just one example of it. Why are those users wanting that data in the page?
Let's start thinking big then. You know,
yeah,
we're in the weeds a bit, I think. Let's get out of the weeds. WYSIWYG MR widgets. Design your own. Maybe you can smush some stuff in there. Maybe I really care about all the test passing and I care about browser performance. So I just want one MR widget that shows two really big emojis that are happy faces or sad faces. And if all the tests pass, I get a happy face. And then if my performance is good or better, I get another happy face. But otherwise, I get different faces. And I designed my MR widget to look like that.
So I think that would go a little bit towards, Sam, your next point, if you want to verbalize that, and then we'll come back to the experience topic.
Yeah, so I was just thinking, like, we're focusing on customers wanting to see extra widgets that we maybe don't provide, but we also sort of, when somebody enables a feature, we just give them an MR widget, and there's no way for them to say, no, I don't actually, like if they put code coverage on because they want the chart of the historical code coverage, they might not care about that in an actual MR sort of thing. So maybe we should be thinking about the other side to this as well, of like, you know, are we showing too much and not allowing people to hide them things? Because that block at the top of a merge request is getting bigger and bigger and bigger. Yeah, I just think it was something that maybe we're thinking about.
Yep. So let's talk a little bit about who has that problem of, all right, actually, so I want to distill that a little bit. It sounds like the problem that we have is that even when there is data that we provide, or if there's data that we're not providing in the GitLab UI, it's not in the format that's usable by all users. And so they want to be able to smush data around to give them better context of what's happened in their pipeline on the merge request page. Does that sound like a decent summary of that with too many words? Silence is acceptance. Great. So who has that problem? Who's using the MR page?
Do you have the personas handy? You just rattle them off.
I can get them handy.
Delaney comes to mind, the dev lead.
Delaney is the individual developer. I'll share screen real quick. So we have
Sasha,
Cameron, the compliance manager, Parker, the product manager, Delaney, the development lead,
yep,
Presley, the product designer,
And then Sasha.
Sasha, the software developer, Devin, the DevOps engineer, systems admin, security analyst, release manager, security operations engineer, and I think that's everybody. Oh, no, wait, Simone, the software engineer and test, Allison, application ops, and then there's a couple internal personas as well. Oh, and I missed the platform engineer too. Oh my goodness,
That's
there's
a
so
new
many.
one.
I think Delaney, Sasha, and Simone would represent what the personas are for
Agreed.
this.
Yeah,
Primarily, though, I think
there's-
it's Sasha, right? That'd be
Yeah.
the number one.
Primarily, it's Sasha. I think there's definitely opportunity for Presley, the product designer. There could be diffs happening with some sort of tooling of compare the design to what shows up in the review app and spit out the problems to me. That's a use case that we've heard before. I think security analyst and release manager definitely could see some things just out of our existing security tooling or additional security tooling that they run on their own. I think security ops engineer would be in that boat as well, potentially.
Yeah, I think
yeah,
that they're like they're almost like third-party users in that they might set up the MR widget to behave how they want Sasha to interpret it. So as the security analyst, I want to stop this MR from going through if this type of security thing happens, and I want it to be very visible in the MR box that like, hey, there's a P1 security issue that's going out in this MR, and I want Sasha to be aware of it and to stop it. So Sasha's the one who's like actively engaged with it on a routine basis, but maybe Sam is the one who sets it up.
Yeah. So the user of the end result user is Sasha, and then kind of the customer maybe for the feature would be that security analyst. Okay. All right, so let's keep going down that thread a little bit with what an ideal outcome then would look like, and let's really try to pull out of the weeds and think big about this. I really like Ricky's WYSIWYG with emojis. I think that's an excellent interface for this. How many smiley faces did you get on your MR? We could even gamify it.
Yeah, so like coming down to it now, I see a lot of the MR widgets are being ignored when things come up. And I think part of that is because it's information overload and there's just a lot of information in those MR widgets right now, especially in the GitLab projects, because we're trying to dog food them all at the same time. The other part of it is I think there's an outstanding issue with the diff of the reports being compared isn't always entirely accurate. So sometimes there are issues that are reported in the MR widget that aren't relevant to the MR in question. So I think we've seen that a couple times. There's quite a few different issues about that around. So the combination of those two things makes at least me as Delaney to kind of just see the MR widgets as a lot of noise right now.
So what would a different solution look like that is less noisy?
Well, I think assuming that there's no bugs, like assuming that all the widgets are relevant and they have the correct information in them, I think it should be up to me as Delaney or Sam or whoever to define what stops an MR and what doesn't, and then to kind of highlight that, and everything else is kind of tertiary information.
Is the view of all these widgets going to be the same for everybody on a project all the time, or does an individual want to control what they see?
Like what I understood from Ricky's comment was we potentially show, or a good outcome would be that you have a minimal set of information, or even a really collapsed view of things that aren't blocking your merge request widget. Or your merge request widget, your merge request. If there's anything that as a group or maybe as an org, you've decided that these things block the merge request from going through. Those then show up expanded big, kind of in your face. But even if something is failing, if there's a threshold, say for browser performance, or for whatever fancy new integration you set up on your own, that you're above or below, whichever you need to be, even if you're failing or not, or it's degraded, but you're still within the green on that, it would show up minimized. So then as a user, like if you're the Presley persona for the designer, I think I got that one right, then maybe you would care about, hey, I always want to see that design widget opened. Is that the use case that you're thinking, Drew?
That could be. The thing that I wasn't sure of is if we're talking about making this being uniform for everybody, because that kind of changes who defines, like who controls what shows up in an important way and what's secondary or, you know, nice to have information is different to different people, but the person setting it might just be setting it for themselves, or they might be setting it for the whole organization. And so I think, and that, like, you know, if it's for the whole organization, then tying it to the group's like mergeability rules makes a lot of sense. But if it's set for an individual, then maybe not, right? Like,
so my question, do we have data on like what persona uses the MR page the most amount of time? You know what I mean? Like given control for population density or whatever, and then figure out proportionally which persona uses the MR widgets the most, then you could kind of control for what you're doing, right? Like maybe there's no reason to have it be customizable by user, at least at first, if 90% of the personas, 90% of the population that uses the MR widget is Sasha persona, right?
That's probably what it is though, right? Like software engineers are the ones who like consistently are using MRs, right? Like other people are gonna check it, but no one's using it, that like with all the meaningful data that it's there. You know, like people are babysitting their pipelines. People are like looking if their merge request is approved, if it got merged already. You know, but I mean, I can see a product manager checking it, but I doubt that it's as much as the software engineer.
Yeah, that's the world we live in today, though. So let's think about GitLab is just controlling information through a pipeline. That pipeline can build code. That pipeline can do other things too. And so if you're expanding into your designer or your security analyst or marketing or legal, like anything that you want to control some data through a flow and control if it merges into whatever kind of your final repository is, can make use of this. And so long term, I think you would want that combination of, as an org, these things are always important to everyone, that we have to stop a merge of data into other data if this is met. And we understand that other people may care about other things. So as we're thinking big, I think it's kind of exciting to say, hey, you can customize what the MR page looks like for yourself so that you can always see the things that you care about.
But then my caveat to that would be, would they all be working on the same project, right? Like would someone from legal and someone from design and security all be working on the same project? Like maybe this is a project level setting where, hey, on this project, the MR widget looks like that. And the way we differentiate between legal or design or security is they have different projects that they operate on with different settings.
Yeah, potentially.
Is the ability to toggle it on and off. It seems like there's like the, you know, what content is being surfaced for who, right? That's one thing that we're talking about. And then is there an ability to toggle on and off just to see it? And then, you know, what level of granularity does that information get surfaced? Is it just for me as a Delaney, or, you know, or me as Sasha, the software developer? Or who gets more value? Does my boss get more value from seeing what the team's code coverage is, you know, overall? I think those are other things to think about as well. Because me, you know, Sasha, myself, am I worried about that number for me as an individual all the time, or is it more important to get, you know, the group level?
Yeah, and I think that's a good point too. I think in the MRs, it being a merge request and not like at the project level or at the group level is the thing that differentiates it between being something for Delaney and something for Sasha, in my perspective. Because I would much rather see the bigger picture of what my team's doing, so I could make informed decisions about processes and stuff like that. That's not that I don't get value from looking at merge requests. It's just that I think I can use my influence better if I'm looking at the bigger picture.
Yeah.
I just think it could be like a bit of both. Like you can have on a project or organization level, say, this is an important widget, this will block merges, this is a less important one, and you know, kind of what Ricky was saying before. And then on a user level, say, okay, what I want to see are the important ones and they're not important. Or, you know, like you can with Slack, where you can say, I want a notification if I'm direct messaged, or all the way down to any message that's put in any channel ever, which hopefully no one turns on because that would be terrifying. But you know, you as a user, you can say, I want to subscribe to this level of widget, and then as an organization, you say what widgets are at what level.
Yeah, you can maybe even start to categorize widgets then too, and say, hey, these are security widgets, these are performance widgets, these are, you know, whatever else kind of widgets. That'd be an interesting capability. Cool. So let's talk a little bit about how we can differentiate this from, I think specifically the GitHub Checks API. I think that's, as I was reading through all these issues, I was like, oh, this is the GitHub Checks API, right? That's the first one that came to mind. But I don't know all the other CI systems. What else is out there? How could we make this way better than anybody else's, you know, kind of merge request or PR page?
I'll just verbalize what I said. That yeah, like you said, it's the Checks API, and then GitHub also solves this with like bots that will post comments into the PR. So it'll like something like pajamas or coveralls will post a comment with the code coverage in there, and then it'll update the comment as your PR changes. So I think that building it directly into a tight integration with an MR widget, making a customizable MR widget, and then maybe as like the really thinking big, allowing the user to define what shows up or not in the MR widget, and even like compound MR widgets is what differentiates us, because it's like really, really tightly integrated. And you load the MR page and it's like the first thing you see is like, hey, this is the state of the MR, what the engineers really care about front and center. I think that really differentiates us from the kind of patchy GitHub Checks API solution where it involves a lot of integrations and there's comments and there's the Checks API, and it's kind of not immediately obvious that these are the problems with the PR that you have to solve right now, or MR that you have to solve right now.
What are other ways we could differentiate the solution to the problem?
Can you say that again? I mean, like, maybe.
Like, what if we telepathically like inject thoughts into the developer's head that this is what is blocking their MR? I'm really big, thinking really outside the box today.
I mean, one from a UX perspective, one thing that I always kind of like, I'm always thinking when I'm designing things is every time that we create something, it's not really the final best version of what we could deliver in terms of the information that they need, right? So I think that the best class experience is if literally the software tells you your pipeline failed because literally it tells you in very verbally, your pipeline failed because this test is failing and is failing at this line, you know? That's how it works nowadays, you know? Right now you have to go dig super deep. Oh yeah, the MR widget is telling me that something is wrong, but I have to go and do a lot of drilling to find the cause, you know?
So since we're thinking big, what if it not only told you what was wrong, but it also told you how to fix it? It's like, hey, this test is failing and you need to change this file because the test doesn't pass. And then, even bigger, what if it just fixed it itself? Huh?
That would be amazing.
So I was just thinking a lot like the way I can write a suggestion and there's a click to apply suggestion button. Just click to resolve this problem.
We actually tried pulling this into some of the vulnerability stuff with Secure, where if there was a known way of fixing it, it would create an MR that fixed it for you, and then you could obviously approve or deny that MR. But bringing that across to other widgets would be really cool. I don't know if that still fits in this think big. Maybe we're going too big, but
No, I think it does. I think potentially even bigger is like, what if you make that part of the wizard that, or whatever, that builds the MR widget? Like, as you add an integration, you can say, hey, do you want to just identify problems or apply suggestions? How, like, where would you source your suggestions and have a way for somebody to build that in? Like if they're bringing in SonarQube or something like that, like, hey, where are the references where you could fix common problems? And maybe even provide a library for things like in those different categories. You can say, hey, here's all the security things that we know how to fix. Doesn't matter what security scanner you have. If we identify CVEs, we're going to start to pull suggestions in, regardless of your flavor of scanner or accessibility or whatever it might be. And you can start to then community source those as well, potentially.
I've used a product, or I've essentially used a product before that does that with upgrading versions of Laravel, which is basically like Rails. So it's this Docker image that you can download and you pay them a licensing fee for it. And it will analyze your code base and then submit a pull request or on GitHub or a merge request on GitLab to upgrade your project to the next version of Laravel. So it'd be the same with Rails. So it would automatically upgrade you from one version to the next and like fixing all the breaking changes that it found in your code along the way. And it has that for each like major version bump where it kind of like automatically upgrades you one thing to another. So that's kind of it's like stuff does this already. And like Sam was saying, they were looking at that for security things too. So that's kind of an interesting parallel stream.
Cool. We are under a minute left on this Think Big. I think we've had some big thoughts and move this forward a little bit. We will continue with the Think Small portion of it next week. Hopefully we can come out with an issue that is an MVC type thing to move forward on this problem. Even if it is an MVC that we end up deciding to throw away and we're moving back from the product, a topic that Drew and I were talking about before we started the recording. Ricky and Joanna and everyone else who is taking notes, thank you as always so much. I started with great intentions and then completely abandoned that, as I usually do. So as always, thank you for helping keep us on track and recording the conversation. All right, thanks everyone. Have a great day.
Yeah.
Cheers.
Yeah.